Hey guys! Earlier in the week, we got in a rocket ship and we went up above planet Earth and we looked down on all the continents and all the oceans. Today, we're actually going to try to dive into the ocean and see what goes on beneath the surface of the water. Before we take that journey, I want to remind you of two things that we've talked about either in our YouTube lessons or at school before we were shut down. So the first word I want to remind you of is photosynthesis. So if you remember from our lessons in the rainforest, you know that plants use photosynthesis to make their food. And one very important ingredient in a plant's ability to do photosynthesis is sunlight. And we remember that in the layers of the rainforest, the amount of sunlight is really important because fewer plants grow on the floor of the rainforest because there's not much sunlight. You're going to notice there's something similar today in the ocean. Okay, so remember, photosynthesis means plants making their own food, and to make food, they need the sun. The other word I want to remind you of today is adaptation. Adaptations are something that a plant or animal does, or something that a plant or animal has in order to survive. So, for example, when we were studying the rainforest, those animals had to be adapted to live in a really wet environment. A lot of those animals have to be adapted to live way high up in the canopy of the rainforest, right? So today, as we dive beneath the surface of the ocean, you're going to learn a little bit, and I want you to think a little bit about how plants and animals have to be adapted to different parts of the ocean. Okay? All right, so that was kind of like our rewind reminder about things that you already may have heard about. What we're going to do now is we're going to dive into the ocean. The problem is my house isn't big enough for the whole ocean. So instead, I have a glass. And this is very tricky because I have to be careful moving it. Here's my glass. And I'm going to move the camera for just a minute so that you can see what's happening in my glass. What do you notice? Well, I notice that there are some layers. At the top, there's this clear layer. Below that, there's a layer that looks yellow. And down beneath that, there's a layer that looks black. These three layers are representing some layers in the ocean, okay? So we're going to start by imagining our tiny itty bitty submarine in the big, big ocean. This top section is called the sunlight zone. This top clear section is called the sunlight zone because this is the part of the ocean that gets, you guessed it, sunlight, okay? The sunlight is important for what? Photosynthesis. So this skinny little layer up here at the top that's clear in my glass is the only layer where plants can do photosynthesis. Down below that, this is a little bit misleading. This layer in my cup is yellow. It's not yellow in the ocean. It's a darker blue color in the ocean, right? This part of the ocean is called the twilight zone. And in the twilight zone, there is no sunlight. So even though it looks yellow in my glass, there is no sunlight in the twilight zone. So what does that mean? It means that plants can't do photosynthesis. If you said photosynthesis, you were correct. And then look at this very, very big black section down at the bottom. This area is called the midnight zone. There's absolutely no sunlight. It's very difficult for plants and animals to survive, and they have to be specifically adapted to survive in this part of the ocean where there's definitely no plant life happening, right? And then even at the bottom, it's so black you can't see. There are layers down below called the abyss, and there are trenches in the ocean that stretch even farther down, okay? So, even though my glass is not a perfect representation of the ocean, the important part for you to remember is that Plants can only live in that top layer called the sunlight zone, okay? The farther down you go, the less sunlight there is, and the more that plants and animals have to adapt to the darkness in order to survive. I'd like to read to you a little bit about the top 3 layers that we talked about, and then tomorrow you'll learn even more about them, okay? So this is a section of my ocean book. It talks about the layers of life in the ocean. We're going to read about the sunlight zone, the twilight zone, the midnight zone, and then I'm going to turn the page and you're going to see some different plants and animals that are adapted to those different areas. Here we go. The sunlight zone. From the ocean's surface to about 328 feet below the waves, plants, plankton, and animals soak up the abundant sunlight that filters down from above. Sea creatures, big and small, feast in this nourishing underwater garden. Down below it says the twilight zone. Very little sunlight reaches the twilight zone. Between about 328 and 3,300 feet deep, no plants can survive here. Only specifically adapted living things, such as jellyfish and bacteria, flourish in this deep. Fish, squid, and shrimp travel between the sunlight and the twilight zones in search of food. Sperm whales search for the squid at this level in hopes of scoring a tasty meal, but these animals all return to the sunlight zone before too long. The midnight zone. Dropping from roughly 3,300 feet to the ocean's deepest trench, almost 36,000 feet down, the midnight zone encompasses some 3/4 of the ocean, where the temperature hovers near frigid at 39 degrees Fahrenheit, and light rays fade away. To survive, deep sea creatures have adapted strange ways to hunt and scavenge for food. Okay, so did you notice when I was reading about the midnight zone, it says that it takes up 3/4 of the ocean? That's why when you look at my layers in the glass, that bottom layer is by far the largest. All right, I sent each of your families a little diagram that shows animals at different levels in the sea. But I also thought that this diagram was just an incredibly cool thing that you had to look at for just a minute. So one of the things that I remember reading is that sperm whales will dive down into this midnight zone to catch squid and other animals, but they have to go back up to the sunlight zone and to the surface before too long, okay? So take a look if you wish. One of the other things that I noticed is that down here in the midnight zone and in the abyss, the animals get more and more unfamiliar to me. But look at some of the things that they might have adapted to survive. I'm seeing fish with lights on their head. I'm seeing animals that look almost like they glow, like they've created some of their own light. Tomorrow, I will be back with more on the layers of the ocean, and then on Friday, we're going to explore the deepest, darkest parts of the ocean and the strange creatures that have adapted to live there. Bye, guys.